Welcome now. Senator Daniel Sparks represents District 5. That includes Itawamba, Prentiss, and Tishomingo counties. Serves as the chair, is this still current, of the Economic and Workforce Development Committee, Vice Chair Judd B. Committee.
That is correct.
Want to make sure we had that right. Yes. I thought so. Well, welcome, Senator. Good to see you, sir.
Thank you. Good to be with you, Gerard.
It's been an active session, I think is one way we could put it. We just went through earlier on the program a number of rather high-profile measures that are no longer with us. They have met their graves, and you still got some stuff out there that I know you're deliberating. But yesterday was a big day for the Public Employees Retirement System, a bill that passed in the House, transmitted to the Senate, that for which there was a hearing conducted by Senator Chris Johnson. You're on that particular committee. And I attended the hearing. I was hanging out in Senator Harkin's office. It's full house, you remember. They wouldn't let anybody in that didn't have a seat. And I got there just after it started, didn't have a seat. So Senator Harkins was kind enough to let me view from the cheap seats there. But that was a marathon hearing. It's some 2.5 hours. I thought you asked some really good questions and tried to get some response and gain some knowledge from 3 members of the board who testified. Also, Mayor Toby Barker of Hattiesburg as well expressed his thoughts about this possible measure. But the bottom line is yesterday, Senator Johnson, who was on the program with us, he told me after the show, said, I don't think I have the votes for this thing. And, in fact, he did not put it up for a vote in your committee, so it thus died. So we got nothing at this point. I think we still got to do something. The question is, what's that something?
Well, I think that's the very important question. Of course, I do appreciate you talking about the hearing that we had, and I think Chairman Johnson did a wonderful job of trying to block out a lot of the noise and actually say, let's get people in a room together, let's discuss it, let's talk about it. And as most of your listeners know, and again, you've talked about Schoolhouse Rocks, we go back time just a bill. A bill starts on one end of the hall, and this happened to start on the other end of the hall. The bill comes to our end of the hall, and it's assigned to a committee. So the chairman nor I knew this bill was going to be assigned to a committee upon which we served. But once that bill or any other bill is assigned, it's our job to look at the bill, look at the language. Do we accept the language as written? Do we think it needs to be amended, adjusted, or tweaked? Or is it a concept we're not even interested in taking up? And the biggest concern that we had this time, and I heard from thousands of people in my district, and I want to go ahead and say that anyone who reached out to me that I haven't been able to get back to, I do apologize. We tried, and one of the things about having the hearing is, of course, the Lieutenant Governor had those rooms wired for sound and audio, and it's archived, and it's something people can go back and watch, and I encourage them to. Because the majority of messages that I received, or a large portion of them, were literally just vote no. And, of course, a lot of times I don't know where these are coming from. There was some tactic, and, I had some screenshots sent to me, bombard them, overwhelm them, flood them. Well, that's fine if that's your tactic, but that's not good government, because I actually want to respond to my constituents, and I try to respond to hundreds of them, I would say. But at the end of the day, our job is to look at the circumstance. Well, I've been very concerned about PERS for the last 3 years. I've only been in the legislature since 2020. Had nothing to do with this bill coming down the questions that I ask. It is a math problem. The majority of commentary I received from people was, don't mess with our board. I get that the ability to elect your board is something that was very important to them, and I think the chairman heard that loud and clear. I think that the whole body did. A lot of people from the House have spoken to me, about the bill. So no one is intending to do anything to unstabilize the system. The goal is to destabilize it. The goal is to stabilize it. And I hear you on the board issue, but that's now behind us. So I think you're asking the right question, is where do we go from here? And my concern, as it always has been, is that 2 years ago, the executive director of PERS came into the Senate Finance Room and told us that we would be 93.5% funded in 25 years, in 2047. I took that as truth. He threw in a caveat that said, anything can happen. You don't get to come in and say that and throw in just a disclaimer, anything can happen. We relied on that information. We voted for tax cuts that year. We voted for historic teacher pay raises that year. Then the very next year, the same person came back to the same finance committee and said, we need 5% increase, which is $371 million. We need it immediately, and we're in duress to a great degree. All of these things are recorded. I'm probably going to put them together in a mashup and put them on my social media, because I asked the question in 22, do I understand you correctly? 93.5 in 25 years. And he was like, yes, we are confident in that. And I don't know who's confident in it, but somebody was confident enough to send the executive director over to say that. Then the next year, duress. So I asked the same question. What about last year? Same thing this year. We go through.
Hold on a second. Duress. I just want to make sure the audience knows. So this mechanism that computes what's called the funding ratio was reported to be at 95%, and they look forward. The actuaries do, usually over a 30-year basis is typically the measurement period. Comes in and says we're at 95%. Hey, good news. We're good to go.
And yeah, and you're correct. It's a 30-year snapshot.
That's right.
We were 5 years into when they had done their snapshot.
That's right.
So they said as long as we track, we will be 93.5%. Now I realize things can happen, as was stated. That's not my concern. My concern is that the board made the decision in the midst of those 3 years to adjust the anticipated rate of return from 7.75 down to 7. That was a board decision. One of the board members who testified actually said he voted against the move from 7.55 to 7 because he thought it shocked the system, or I said shocked the system. I think he agreed with me. And I want to be very clear. When I say duress, the system is stable. The system is strong. The system has almost $34 billion under management, and the system has made 9.78% returns for the last 15 years. But the concern I had is that the reduction of the rate from 7.75 to 7 inflated our liability by $6 billion. That is unrefuted. We would have 19.1 unfunded liability, but for that decision, that drove us below 60%. And now, in response to that, they have increased the employer contribution 5% over the next 3 years, which is $371 million on K-12, cities, counties, universities, and state employees.
Right. So I just want to go through the chronology. The 95% or 93%. So that I would say would be kind of surprising if you heard that, knowing that in the years prior it was well below that, and all of a sudden, boom, we show up in this year, and then we come back the subsequent year, right? And yes. What you're saying is that the executive director came in and said, well, we got that wrong essentially, but it was revised downward. Yes. Significantly. It's 56% right now.
Well, and to be very clear, he was not saying we're at 93.5% today. He said in 25 years, we will be 93.5 as long as we track like we're going. And we relied on that. So what I have done, and instead of just complaining about it, for the last 2 years, I've spent several hours with the staff at PERS. They have called me. I have called them. I think you have shared. They've been very responsive. And I've tried to dig into the information to try to be helpful. Yeah. Now, here comes this bill this year, which I didn't know was coming. And it gets mixed in with the numbers of what we're talking about, because and then it got to be politics, and then it got to be who could scare somebody the worst. and I want to apologize. Right. I really do. I want to apologize to a lot of people across this state who have been fear-mongered, who are retirees or close to retirement age over the last few days to push the panic button. That's wrong. People ought to be ashamed of doing that. And I've had some of those calls. I've talked to 83-year-old retired school teachers who that is their sole source of income. And I said, I'm so sorry that you have been you've been fear-mongered, but no, ma'am, your money is safe. Your benefits are safe. Your earned benefits are safe. So, I think that's the reality. We started seeing some things out there about, in context, I made an issue about the $100 million that we spend on fees and actuaries and consultants. Now, that may be a good number. That may be a very reasonable number for $33 billion of assets under management. But the PERS board, in their objection to 1590, expressed that in 31 cents per $100 invested. So they're not telling their members it's $100 million. Well, then they've responded back saying, I'm out of context. Math is never out of context. Math is undefeated. I didn't promote this bill when it started. I'm promoting the stability of PERS. And that's what I'll continue to do. And I really do appreciate folks that give us that opportunity to be deliberative.
Sure. We got a break here. I did want to just add something to your response there. The 93%, that's always a forward-looking number, yes. The funding ratio. I want to be clear. So when they came and said it's 93%, I misspoke with saying this year. The 93% means, according to our calculations at this point in time, in that 30-year period, we're 93%.
That's we're going to get there, and you don't need substantive change for us to get to 93.5. We just need to hit our number.
That was the message. Came back the following year, and it was a different message. We're coming right back. We got Senator Daniel Sparks in the Element Well studio. So I just want to make sure we got that right. We got Senator Daniel Sparks that you were told in 1 year, hey, look, our target, which is 2047, that's the year the actuaries deemed to produce these various metrics for. And that's what they pay attention to, just to measure the trend of the program and its long-term sustainability. And this funding ratio is one of the three major metrics that actuaries use. It's the top one, the main one. And so you get the message that from PERS that, hey, look, by 2047, we're going to be sitting at 93% funding ratio. But then the subsequent year, you got a different figure, right?
You did, and you could tell. Like I said, I'm so thankful all this is recorded because you can hear the surprise in my voice. Chairman Harkins asked the question even before I asked it, but I'm like, did I understand you correctly? Because I thought surely I didn't understand him. And then the next 2 years, I've gone back to that, and you know that ship has sailed. It's kind of like the 1999 legislation that added about $4 or $5 billion of debt. As I've said all along, it's an earned benefit, and you know the state has an obligation to take care of that. The problem we get into from a legislative standpoint is that I do believe Chairman Johnson and others worked very hard to deliver a product that our committee could have voted on that would have preserved the integrity of the board in the eyes of the PERS members, and it would have done some other things that are probably beneficial, but just simply wasn't allowed to do that, and that's part of the process. So I respect everybody that has opinions in the matter, and certainly try to do what's best for my constituency, and it was a great opportunity for me to reconnect with a lot of people that I haven't talked to maybe in a while that taught me or around, and I take this job very seriously. I am honored to have this job, but the people who put me here and the people who know me the best are actually the people who know that I'm not going to give up because something's hard, that I'm going to dig in, I'm going to do the work. And the biggest thing, and Gerard, I guess, I don't know if it's a point of personal privilege on the show, but I'm not going to deceive you to beat you. I'm not going to deceive you to pass something. And it probably is an excellent segue into 2799, which is my bill. But, you know, I've been maligned pretty well on that bill from the PERS community provocateurs. And let me be very clear. That's a very small amount of people who have panicked everybody else. But you can go read 2799, which is my bill, and it has never touched the composition of the PERS board. And I shared that with people to make sure to try to quell that, because some of the emails started to be, you know, kill this bill and kill 2799. And it gave me an opportunity. I had some of the kindest messages in response. And I'll tell you, I had some messages from people who said, Daniel, we know you, we trust you, do your best. And I won't ever forget that people sent me here to do my best,
well,
and to be honest.
That's good. Before we get off the PERS and go to 2799, a couple of things kind of crossed my mind I thought could have improved the bill. One of those would have been perhaps instead of just such an abrupt major overhaul, going from 8 elected members to 2, and then having 7 appointed members, 4 by the governor, 3 by the lieutenant governor. Perhaps we could kind of compromise and maybe give the PERS membership a couple of more elected seats and reduce those from the appointed members and get kind of a more balanced composition. Some that are appointed, roughly half, and half that are elected by the PERS membership at large, just as an option. And the other thing I'll run by you, I know you've seen this. There are many members who feel that the Supplemental Legislative Retirement Program, commonly known as SLRP, which is a terrible acronym, that many of them feel like, well, the legislators got this special benefit to this SLRP program, and that's the reason that the PERS program is facing this financial headwinds, which is mathematically inaccurate. That that's not true. It's a really teeny tiny thing. Where I'm going with this is you got to serve 2 terms to vest in that program, and if you do, I use the PERS calculator. A legislator would receive $235 a month in a SLRP benefit. Their PERS benefit would be about $550 a month. Would you support the idea of just phasing out the SLRP program, just to take that off the table, make everybody whole that's in it now, but just migrate away from it?
I wouldn't have any problem for that. I'm going to be honest with you. When I ran for this office, Gerard, I knew the salary was $10,000. Now, I knew that you would get per diem, you would get mileage, and you would get a hotel allowance, as the federal rate allows. But I didn't know about SLRP. I didn't run for SLRP. I think that's one of the most foolish acronyms that's ever been put out there. And all it does is give a talking point that has no bearing. Because I'm going to be honest with you, I think your numbers are high because nobody makes, I think you said $40,000 to Chris Johnson. The part that actually is subject to retirement, I think, is lower than that. But, but to go back to the bigger issue, the board composition, I had a range of people who said, do not touch the board. We want to elect our members. That's where our confidence lies. And they were very strong about that. Then I did have a lot of people who responded and said, hey, look, we don't mind there to be a change. We want to maintain majority. And, okay, I understand that argument. And then some people said, hey, we know there needs to be some change, but we don't like this particular version of it. So potentially, could that be something that's out there? Maybe, but I think the majority of people I talk to, that's a red line for them. They have confidence and trust in the members that they've elected, and they don't want additional board members. And I really don't know that I have a big feeling about the composition of the board. It's the composition of the math. And I go back to this board's decisions in the last 3 years, raised the liability by $6 billion. It drove the funded percentage below 60, and they're using that to justify a 5% increase. And if you remember in the hearing, one of the PERS board members is a superintendent of education, and it was $300,000 hit to his school district this year, $750 after the full 5%. And I asked him, how are you going to pay for that? And I just encourage your audience to go to YouTube, to the Mississippi Legislature channel, and listen to his answer, because I'm not sure he answered it, except he said it's going to be tough. We're going to have to find places to cut. We have teachers who are retiring, and we may not be able to hire back, and that starts another issue. So you could tell by how he explained it that I have superintendents all over this state. I have mayors and boards of supervisors who don't know how they're going to pay for this. And I am going to join Senator Johnson in asking the PERS board to do 2 things. I'm going to ask them to pause the 2% increase. I'm going to ask them to do that as not putting this burden perpetually on these communities. And I'm going to ask them to begin to live stream their meetings and their working groups, record and archive those, just like the Senate does, so that we can see their beneficiaries are going to grow in confidence in their PERS board members if you just show us what you're doing. And I think the same thing's true for the legislature. I think it would be great if we could go watch the hearty debate that they had when they made the decision to inflate the liabilities by $4.4 billion in 1 year by going from 755 to 7.
Isn't that all recorded in the minutes? I mean, I don't have a problem with the live streaming.
The minutes tell me what happened, Gerard. It doesn't tell me what anybody said.
Well,
it just says there's a vote. Depends
on how detailed the minute takers are, I guess. Sometimes you will see, specific comments made by members recorded in the minutes board. But I get it. It's not certainly that's not going to be as robust a record as a live stream would be, where everything's in there. But the other thing is, and you and I talked about this yesterday, I too have just kind of questions, I would say, about why do we reduce the target rate from 7.75, 7.55, now 7. And there may be some legitimate rationale for that. I don't really know. I don't know that anybody has actually come to us and said that, other than we have this concern and that concern. But But I guess the question is does that mean the money managers, both internal and external, they're going to manage to that figure? They're not going to try to achieve the maximum for the fund?
I don't know. I assume they're going to try to achieve the maximum, but if you lower the hurdle height from 8 to 7, it's just a lower hurdle height.
And that is figured into the actuarial math with the unfunded liability.
And let me be clear, too. I'm not saying 7's the wrong number. How we got there to get from 7.75 to 7 in 3 years shocked the system, and that's why I'm asking them to pause.
Agree.
So thank you for that.
Yeah, so I would say 7 may not be unreasonable, honestly. And historically, the fund has done quite well. I mean, it's 7.95 over 30 years. Not bad, honestly.
It has, but the PERS board, and maybe not these members, because some of them you only have 2 years. The PERS board in the past has not brought the number down. So they've always had this ability to bring the number down, but we just brought it down 3/4 of a point in 3 years, and that's part of the concern.
I agree with you. I think that your explanation to me yesterday made a lot of sense to me, resonated with me, is that it's not so much you have concern about the rate as much as it is the method and the way in which it got to that point was a bigger concern. Am I accurately
That's
saying
correct,
that?
because then that's being used to justify this liability to raise the rate 5%.
I get it, because that's easy. Hey, just make those guys pay more money. Let's be honest. That's what this is. We're coming right back. We'll get to 2799 with Senator Daniel. Studio with Senator Daniel Sparks. So let's just kind of close the loop on the PERS deal. So, the main, if you think about what the board's purview is and their scope of authority, really, Senator, it's two major areas the way I see it. One is they do have control over the employer contribution rate. Second thing is they do select third parties for actuarial consulting and also investment consulting, and they negotiate those contracts, which include the fees, and they do, to a great extent, direct kind of how assets should be allocated at a high level from a risk perspective, how much risk to take. They don't get into the weeds of, I think we ought to buy Microsoft, for example. I just happen to name them because that's the top holding in the domestic equity portfolio portion. But they are responsible for setting the parameters and the guidelines, including the target investment rate that we're just talking about. Those are kind of the main responsibilities of the board as far as the math aspect of it. Would you agree with that, or what else do you see there?
I think that's true. And again, I would go back and watch all their hearings if I could, because it would help me learn a lot more about how it is put together. But I would say that they also control the internal knobs.
That's true.
Of policy, which included when we had the 31+% return in year 2021, they used part of that money to pay the unfunded liability, and they used part of that money to buy the rate down from 7.75 to 7.55. Those are decisions that are made by the board. I'm not saying they're bad decisions. And again, as you said earlier, 7 probably is the right target. It's just how we got there and the shock to the system, followed up by the increase that is $371 million. It's just that's hard for our cities, counties, and K-12 people to handle.
But if 7, assuming 7 is the right number, and one of the things I shared with you yesterday is I asked the PERS folks if they had done a regression analysis. If it were, and I know you're familiar with that for those that maybe haven't done that in the past, but you just essentially have kind of a what-if model that says if the rate is this is what the result is. If the rate is this, so if it's 7, if it's 7.5, 7.75, so you can kind of play with that and maybe understand, I guess, what the outcome would be based on the various rates and contrast between that exercise hadn't been done, and that's fine, but maybe that would be instructive. I just think if we're assuming that maybe 7 is the right number, and in fact our long-term looking out funding ratio is 65%, we got to do something elsewhere, and we're not going to likely modify benefits. I don't see any appetite on the part of the legislature to do so, and if they did it, I honestly believe it would would trigger some lawsuits that we'd probably lose. So we're down to how do we get more money into the fund?
Well, and I think too. I guess I'll just try to close with this. Sure, I don't have any appetite for taking away somebody's earned benefit. I believe it is a moral obligation to make those payments.
Agreed.
They've earned it, and that's people in the system today. They're retirees and those who are working. You're already locked in. My other, I guess, comment would be I didn't just get interested in PERS when this bill came from the House. I've been interested in it very strongly since I got here, but certainly since 2022. And my commitment is to continue to try to learn more, work with the board, get to a better location, and so that we can make this fund continue to be stable and continue to be an asset for hiring state employees across the state of Mississippi, and that's what we want.
I think that's the position of virtually everybody. I know everybody I've talked to in the Capitol. It's just a function of how do we get there? You know, what's the best way to get there? All right, so 2799, your legislation. I have reviewed it somewhat at a very high level. Tell us about this bill and exactly what it does.
Sure. The 2799 addresses the appointments to agencies, boards, and commissions and how their executive directors serve as well of the agencies, boards, and commissions. So much of our government, we're a part-time legislature, as you're well aware. We have divisions, most of them of the executive branch, that whether they're Medicaid or some other division, forestry, and they are experts in the field. And so we have agencies, boards, and commissions that serve in that capacity, and most of them have an appointment feature. So the bill did not change anyone's appointing authority. It didn't change any number of people on the board, criteria, education, years of service, all of that. All it did was try to streamline so that half of the board, using a majority because you can't half 5 evenly. So if it's half of the board in year one would be of the appointing authorities. The governor has appointments, lieutenant governor, attorney general. A lot of people have appointments. And then in year 3, the remainder of the board would be appointed. So there is a staggering of the board, but it's in year 1 and year 3. The Secretary of State is tasked with being the repository for all appointments. So they are to deliver by December 15 of each year to whomever has appointments that are up. Say, hey, these appointments are up, these are the criteria, and make sure we get those done because we want them done in a timely fashion. We also have a term of 4 years. The reason for the 4-year term, we have a 4-year term of a legislature, and we advise and consent many of these positions, and we've added positions that are advise and consent under this legislation. That means the Senate, looks at a peer report, and we vote on that appointee. We see it at the federal level all the time. We think about it with federal judges being advised and consented. It also gives the Secretary of State the duty to look at the boards, agencies, and commissions, their meeting habits, because we've had some agencies, boards, and commissions that have had vacancies to the extent they couldn't get a quorum. Can you imagine being someone who is going to be licensed who can't get the board to meet because the board doesn't have a quorum? So we have addressed that issue, and then holdover appointments when your term ends. There's 6 months that you need to appoint someone, or that's when your holdover ends and that seat will go vacant. So we believe it will help expedite. It also will help the executive branch to be delivered in a more, concise manner, who they have to appoint. I've talked with people from the last 3 administrations, and that is a daunting task for a governor coming in, particularly in year 1. So I do think that it's good government. I think it puts us in advise and consent. I think that the terms should be advised and consented no less than every 4 years because that legislature changes. So the same legislature that advised and consented somebody in 2019 is not the same legislature today.
But there's some boards that are not included in this, right?
That's correct. Certainly, if it's constitutional, we can't
is
pass
IHL
a statutory.
constitutional?
I believe that one was set aside, as was the Board of Education, and there may be others that are not in the bill. We were trying to make a good faith effort to capture the majority of agencies, boards, and commissions, and to have continuity, to have consistency.
IHL's 9 years, used to be 12, and I think education may be 7.
Education's 9,
it's
and
9,
it is constitutional.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So we don't touch those.
Can't.
I got to tell you, from the perspective of being a lottery board member, I think this would be detrimental. I think this would be problematic. The continuity is a big thing. I think the staggered approach, it's embedded in the Alice G. Clark Lottery Act, made a lot of sense. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 year terms for the 5 members. That does, of course, sort of force staggering in that not one governor could so-called pack the board. It sounds to me like, though, under this thing, a new governor in 2028 could come in and say, hey, look, I'm going to uproot that whole deal, and here's 3 now, and then in 2 or 3 years later, here's the other 2. and one governor will have appointed the entire board, as opposed to the goal of having staggered terms, which means that multiple governors would outfit the board, or that one governor couldn't, I guess, completely have dominate the board with their appointees.
Well, I think the boards are still staggered, and in the scenario that you give me a 5-member board, the governor is going to have 4 or 5 seats after 4 years anyway, because each one's coming up every year.
Could be a different governor, though.
Well, not in a 4-year window usually.
Right.
Like when a guy comes in, and by the way, thank you for pointing out, it is 2028. This does not go into effect until 2028 for the reconstitution of these boards, because I didn't want that to be a slight to the current governor, because he's already appointed people. Sure. That just made sense. So if there's something out there that is so terribly difficult, we literally have time to come back and address each issue. I do find it kind of interesting. This bill's been out there for several weeks. I had a couple of minute inquiries about it, just the operation side of it. Not a lot of dust up. Then it got pulled into the PERS debate wrongfully. And then I heard a lot about it, about nothing the bill did. And now in the last 36 hours, 24 hours really, because deadline day was yesterday, I have heard from numerous people. I've watched them circle Chairman Zuber's committee room, and not us. Well, I'm going to tell you, as many people that are upset about it now, it must be a good government bill. Because,
I'll leave you with this, though. The 4-year term of, say, in the case of the lottery, I'm thinking about that one because I've been involved in the hiring of a president. There's like nobody in the state that really has any experience. You got to import somebody to serve in that role. Attracting them into that job with only a 4-year guarantee of employment, I think would be a challenge.
Yeah, but here's your guarantee of employment. Do a good job. You're going to be reappointed. You're going to be reconfirmed. We have to run every 4 years, and if we don't do a good job, we don't get reconfirmed by our voters. So
it'd still be a problem.
I understand that, but I do think it's something that also geographically we tried to clean up all these old congressional districts. We're going with Supreme Court districts because we have people right now who are appointed who are not eligible because of some goofy line in the past.
Appreciate it, Senator.
Thanks,
man.
Thank you, Gerard.
Yep.